the SmallmouthCrush podcast. If you're a hardcore angler, you've come to the right place. This is a weekly podcast that will interview some of the top smallmouth bass anglers in North America. Travis and his guest will discuss what it takes to consistently catch big smallmouth, and you'll get a glimpse inside the mind of a trophy smallmouth angler. And now, here's your host of the SmallmouthCrush podcast, Travis Manson.
You're welcome to the Smallmouth Crush podcast. Another great week talking smallmouth. Can't get enough of this, although we're coming up to the end of the season. And looks like we will have a season 2 in the works. Just not quite sure how that's going to be laid out just yet. But it's been a lot of fun. Been a lot of work. I hope you guys are enjoying all this great smallmouth information that we're getting from all these great guests. But I do want to thank, of course, The Real Shot. They've been a sponsor of this podcast from the start. Really, they're the premier tackle store in Wisconsin. They're on the web, therealshot.com. You can purchase all of your fishing equipment. They got a bunch of hunting equipment, too. I know this is a time of year where we're starting to get into hunting as well. And so if you head on over there, they got pretty much anything and everything you need fishing related as well. Kitech, Megabass, Evergreen, Demiki, Ozuri. They got it all. Rapala, VMC, Berkeley, Z-Man, all the standard brands as well. If you use my code SmallmouthCrush15 at checkout, you're going to get 15% off your first order. So that's a pretty good deal. TheRealShot.com. Let's bring on today's guest. And there he is. Jason, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. How are things going on your end?
Awesome. You know, I'm really looking forward to this. I know you love catching smallmouth, big smallmouth. And love to really get into it with you and pick your brain when it comes to chasing these fish. But before we go there, Jason, if you could give us a quick introduction about yourself and a little bit about your background and kind of what you're up to today.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. I mean, I love, just like you, we love our smallmouth bass. I pretty much love everything fishing, but you know, being from up north, we obviously are passionate smallmouth guys. So, I mean, we have to be if we want to compete in any fishing tournaments, of course. So, don't get me wrong. I love catching my largies too, but smallmouth is the name of the game. So, I got kind of a little bit of a different background probably than the majority of your guests just because of my geographical location. I'm born and raised just actually on the island of Montreal. So, I'm from Montreal. And unlike you guys in the States or, you know, further down south or even guys in Ontario for that matter, I mean, bass is, I think we're number 8 or number 10 on our target species list here in Quebec. So growing up, I mean, it was pretty much everything but bass fishing, really. And not because I wasn't into it, not because the people around me weren't into it. It's just we didn't know anything about it. So Bob Izumi being my idol, I mean, you know, he was with his fishing show was always a multi-species type of deal. So I could say I pretty much came to the game considerably later than the majority of the hardcore bass guys such as ourselves. You know, when you look at, you know, you just look at the growing up, I thought it was only live bait would catch fish or inline spinners. I had a real hard time with anything else. Even our tackle shops never even had knowledgeable, you know, store staff who could teach you about bass fishing. So it kind of had a little bit of a weird beginning. And then I don't know how this podcast is going to roll. We can get it. I mean, it's kind of a neat way I got into it with my fishing partner at a pro-am and stuff. I mean,
what got you interested in bass fishing? You know, growing up, obviously there was other species. I guess, first of all, what did you like to target growing up? Well, before there was bass, what was like the key fish that you just loved to fish for?
Dude, I couldn't catch any fish. So there was just going fishing. And the best way I can put it is I have a lot of people ask me often, like where did your fishing passion begin from? And the crazy thing is that I think it was 8 years old. I'd wake up in the morning, like I just mentioned, and I'd run downstairs and go watch Bob Izumi Reel Fishing and then the Fishing Canada show. So especially, like I said, I was a hockey guy growing up in Montreal. My parents didn't fish. My uncles didn't fish. Nobody I knew fished. So I to this day, I often still ask myself where it happened. Was it one day I drove by a lake going to a hockey tournament and saw a fish or saw somebody fishing off the bank or something? I can't really tell you. But, you know, the bass fishing actually really started in like 2005, 2006 when I accidentally in the spring walleye fishing came across some pretty big smallmouth Had no idea at that point of what seasons were or anything. I mean, obviously educated myself pretty quickly on that. But I thought it was God's gift to bass fishing when I started catching all those fish in May, walleye fishing at that time. So to answer your question, I mean, realistically, it all started trying to chase walleye and then seeing what bass was all about. Excuse me. And then obviously from there, Bassmaster magazine, educating myself and everything. But to kind of come back to your initial question, my background really has evolved. I mean, I think a lot of us have had that dream of somewhat being a professional angler or, somewhat making our living in the fishing industry. And over the years, I was fortunate enough to actually become the rep for Eastern Canada for Minn Kota and Shimano for quite a few years. And then in the last couple of years, I've actually came on board as the national sales manager for American Bait Works for all of Canada. So that's kind of how the progression, I know I kind of gave you a real quick rundown, but that's kind of how the progression really started from a young age. Just wanted to catch fish, realizing how cool bass were. And then from there, the passion just took off. I ended up, getting into a Pro-Am tournament with my partner that I fish with up to these days, and Nicholas, and, it kind of all took off from there.
Wow. Was there a lot of bass tournaments growing up, or your first event? What made you want to get involved in tournament fishing?
So in reality, up until really 2006, 2007, I almost didn't even know a bass tournament existed. To that, we're that sheltered, or, lack of fishing education or high-end fishing education in Quebec. It was pretty serious. And that's actually, we'll get on that later. That's kind of all the social media stuff I'm doing, is to continue with the education. I love what you guys are doing. Believe it or not, I learned a bunch off your channel on Lake Ontario, how to find, I don't have much of an issue finding river fish, but finding lake fish when it's these big, expansive flats. So I like sharing, the education and teaching people. But where it all really came together was I must have been that 2006, 2007 year. I was at the Montreal Outdoorsman Show, fishing and hunting show, whatever you want to call it. And a local tournament trail called Quebec Bassmasters had a draw for a Pro-Am. So basically you can enter your name and you can be chosen. And, they randomly called me at some point in early June and said, hey, your name was drawn. You're invited to come and fish this Pro-Am tournament. So then, and I might be screwed on my timelines. Maybe that year I was starting to get into the U.S. tournaments and reading a little bit about it as I developed and learned more about bass. But it all kind of happened at the same time. And when I showed up at the tournament, they said, you're fishing with Nicolas Gendron and Matthew Gendron. And I look across the room and there's this, I think I must have been 21 at the time, 22. And Nicholas is 18 and his brother's 16. First question I asked him, I'm like, what kind of bass boat you got?
Right.
So, and we ended up actually winning that tournament.
No kidding.
Yeah, I was fishing a jerk shad on a medium spinning rod. So how I ended up landing the tournament lunker, I have no clue. I think mono even on the reels. So
sure.
Yeah, it was pretty basic stuff. But then obviously, your first tournament you win, and then it just ended up progressing from there. Nicholas his brother ended up, going to do something else, and we started fishing together. I think 2007 would have been the Pro-Am, and we started fishing together in 2008. And that's really where tournaments started for me, was Quebec Bassmasters on the St. Lawrence River. Wow.
So I was going to ask you what you consider your home body of water, or the place that you fish the most. What would that be? Is it the St. Lawrence down in that stretch of the? Okay.
Yeah. So Lake St. Francis would be my home body of water. I've, been fishing Lake St. Francis, pretty hard since probably 2008 to 2009 is where it really would have taken off. I probably have like 3,000 waypoints on St. Francis. I literally have looked at every edge, every flat, every hump. So by far, definitely. But I would say the St. Lawrence River from Morrisburg all the way to Lac St. Louis, which is the St. Lawrence just outside the island of Montreal, would probably be my home body of water.
Oh, great. Yeah. So those that are not familiar, we've all heard about the St. Lawrence River and the great fishing and the Thousand Islands. This section is actually below a dam, a man-made dam that was built. I don't know when it was built, but it basically is kind of a totally different section of the St. Lawrence River. I mean, a lot of tournaments can't lock through and vice versa. So you're kind of stuck at, I'm going to call it a pool for lack of better knowledge, but it's definitely amazing stretch of the river, very unique. It's got great largemouth as well as smallmouth, just like a lot of the other parts of the St. Lawrence River. And then, of course, Lake St. Francis, which is a huge body of water in itself. And so for you to spend that much time and learn it, I mean, there's so much to it. I'm sure there's a ton that you don't know about that stretch because it's just so massive. What do you think the future holds as far as fishing in that stretch? Are you guys seeing the amount of pressure that we might see a little bit closer to Lake Ontario, and how has the fishing changed for the better or the worse in the last couple of years?
That's Travis. That's a great question, and I would argue that just by years and years on that body of water, I've learned more by fishing, and you could probably say the same about all the stuff you fish, probably more than any biologist could tell you, just by seeing the evolution, seeing how the river operates. So you made a good point. So the very interesting part about Lake St. Francis is that it is controlled by two hydroelectric dams. So obviously you have the Moses Saunders Dam, which runs between the U.S. side and the Ontario side. And then you have the Beauharnois Dam, which is the main discharge into the St. Lawrence below Lake St. Francis. So it literally changes every single year, depending on the water flow, depending on, the current draws, the power needs. So it's a pretty complex question, but the best way that I can answer it is it's getting better. And I wouldn't necessarily say that above the dam is getting better. And I'll back that up with some points, because obviously guys will look at the weights and be like, man, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Look at these monster bags coming out of Lake O and coming out of Clayton and stuff. And that's all true. The difference with Lake St. Francis and above the dam, so the St. Lawrence, let's just call it the St. Lawrence below the dam and the St. Lawrence above the dam, is that below the dam is fed by 5 or 6 major tributaries. So you have the Grass River, St. Regis, you have the Raisin River, the Baudette River, you have the Salmon River. Drawing a blank. I know there's one or two others. There's another one up on the reserve that I'm just not thinking of right now. And then there's a bunch of creeks that are also tributaries as well. So the vast majority, and I say vast majority, like I'd probably say between 80 to 90% of the smallmouth population are untouched in the spring. They run up these rivers. They spawn in peace. They spawn early. Obviously, you guys have it on your side of the river as well, but our M&R are very strict. Our catch and release, we have no catch and release season. I mean, I'm kind of contradicting myself. We opened it early this year, but like our season opens late. We're really conservative when it comes to bass conservation, if you want to call it. So our fish spawn healthy, good, clean, and they have these phenomenal spawns. So don't get me wrong. There'll be guys, I got bedders on the main river. I'm like, dude, that's 3% of the smallmouth population. So when you get those insane numbers of deep fish, that are up towards Cornwall and Akwesasne and stuff, I mean, those fish are spawning by the thousands in those brown water tributaries. So the fishing is continuously getting better because they are having these phenomenal spawns. For the most part, I mean, there's environmental changes that'll obviously affect low water years in those rivers and stuff, which I can't, shed too much light on because the fishing's been getting better and better. But I mean, let me put it this way. We fished a tournament in July early July when fish are supposed to be weighing a bit light. We weighed in just under 24 pounds and finished in 8th place on a 40 boat tournament. Sure. We're not talking a 200 boat tournament. We're talking a 40 boat tournament. I came in with 2370 and I was in 8th place. Wow. So, and I'm talking, we're throwing back dozens and dozens of 2 and 3 pounders as well. Conversely, above the dam, it's primarily main river spawners. You don't have those big tributaries. Yeah, you got a couple in Waddington and stuff, but I mean, for the size of that river, it's all main river. So what ends up happening is, the sight fishermen, as you become better and better at bed fishing and you get more and more boats doing it, I mean, these fish are getting absolutely throttled. You look at some of those major events they had this year in the spring, like back-to-back major events. I mean, they had it with a college series. I think it was last year or the year before. Like, I think it was like 350 boat 3-day tournament during the spawn. So this is not to get into a debate on whether, it's good or bad, but I cannot imagine in 5 years or in 7 years if the fishing is going to be nearly as good above the dam and towards Lake O, as it is what we're seeing right now. Now, obviously, I know that they're doing some changes. I heard New York is right on the cusp of doing some pretty significant changes as well, which I think, as crappy as it is, because catching bedded fish is always fun. In the same token, I mean, they're real vulnerable, and I think we need to protect this incredible resource.
I agree 100% with you. It's fun. It's I enjoy doing it, but I realize the sacrifice, that the fish are giving up to be able to have a productive life cycle and not be harassed constantly. It is important. There's got to be a balance between the two, and we're certainly seeing that up on above the dam as far as a lot of the pressure, when it comes to smallmouth fishing that time of year. But that's fascinating. I'm real curious too. I know you're talking, there's another dam near Montreal. Do you explore further down in that stretch as well? And then let me ask you this, because I'm just curious. I got to know, and maybe you don't know, because we still probably have a couple more 100 miles before you get to the ocean. Like, how far down can you catch a smallmouth in the St. Lawrence River?
So that is a wicked question, and I wish, I'm really happy we're doing this, because I wish I'm watching Bassmaster Live, and they're just talking about the St. Lawrence River. Basically, they're talking Waddington to the lake. And I'm like over here going, guys, there's like another 200 miles of St. Lawrence River, which is phenomenal fishery. So below the Beauharnois Dam, you get into a big basin. Actually, no, I'm looking on my wall. I got a map behind me. No, that's St. Francis and the St. Lawrence. I have the whole stretch of river on but so that river. So what's really interesting about the basin below St. Francis is that that's where the Ottawa River dumps into. So if you go look at Google, the Ottawa River discharges into Lake St. Louis in English, Lac St. Louis in French. So now you have the St. Lawrence River that comes in on one side, and you got the Ottawa River brown water coming in, and it actually makes this incredible water stain line right through the middle of the river. Obviously, the South Shore would be the St. Lawrence, the shipping channel, and stuff like that. And that's a phenomenal fishery. Like, you're not going to get like a 20-pound bag is like a real solid bag of smallmouth. A big bag of largemouth that weigh around 20 pounds. You got like a real good natural bird reserve there. That's like got a bunch of rice and mat and everything. And then as you go further east, there's no more dams. So that's where the river flows naturally all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. It probably goes, you probably have about 100, no, that's more than that. You probably have about 300 kilometers, which would be about 200 miles of bassy water. As you go further east, more and more rivers dump into the St. Lawrence, and the watercolor changes to that dark greenish, brownish hue to it.
The whole river?
It gets a lot darker.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and all those tributaries there are all brown water rivers, and some of them are pretty big. Like, you have in French, they're called the Mille River, which is in English the Thousand Islands River, because there's a bunch of real small islands. And these are all pretty significant size tributaries that, have real significant flow to them. So to answer your question is, where does it go? Quebec City, which, we've all heard of Quebec City, which is about 200 miles, 180 miles east of Montreal. And there's about a 10-foot tide. You can still catch smallmouth.
Whoa.
Yeah, so you can still catch tidal
crazy.
Smallmouth. And what's crazy there is the weights start to go back up as you get to the tides. So you can get like 25-pound bags of spinnerbait, 2-foot deep, like brown water smallmouth up there.
Wow.
Now, don't get me wrong. It's not the norm. It's not Lake Ontario fish. It's not, St. Francis or Waddington fish. But, it's a power fisherman's paradise, jerk shads and chatterbaits and spinnerbaits, even topwater for that matter, right? So to answer your question, you're looking at from Lake Ontario, you're looking at about 350 miles of river that you can fish before you really get into more of that brackish water towards the Saguenay, where you get whales and stuff like that.
That's pretty cool, man. I'm glad. I'm always curious. There's not a lot of people. I don't know anybody that fishes that stretch. Is there tournaments that go on down there?
Yeah, there's nothing big. So again, come back to what I started it with, being an uneducated Quebec angler for the most part. Now, don't get me wrong. Quebec anglers are getting, if you look at some of the Renegade results and even some of the TIO results and stuff, you're getting a bunch of Quebec teams that are becoming very good anglers. But for the most part, the general population are not bass anglers. You get the younger guys like us that are into it, even younger than us. But for the most part, it's walleye and brook trouts and fly fishing and a lot of musky guys and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, there's not a ton of tournaments, but every year you'll get one or two decent tournaments that'll be about 60 or 80 miles east of Montreal. And they're good. So if you actually, after this, obviously, podcast, you go look at Google. So the St. Lawrence River will narrow. So that Lac St. Louis will then narrow down into the St. Lawrence River. It'll run for about 50, 60 miles. And then it'll open up into a massive lake, similar to Lake St. Francis. It's called Lake St. Pierre.
Okay.
And that lake is, 40 miles long, 50 miles long. And then it narrows back down. And then that's the St. Lawrence River all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
So a lot of tournaments will be, I say a lot, the few tournaments that there are will be held either at the eastern end or the western end of Lake St. Pierre.
Wow. Well, that's going to be on my list someday to go check it out. How would you describe the scenery down in that end? Is it wilderness? Is there still a lot of houses? Is it very similar to what we're used to at the top end, or what does it look like?
So totally different. It floods a lot down there depending on the spring. It gets pretty nasty down there. So you got right at the mouth of Lake St. Pierre, you've got something called the Sorel Islands, which would be similar to what you would call the islands in St. Francis before the lake opens up. It's kind of the same type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that they're brown water, and those are more flats really than islands on Francis, but let's say those were islands. And you get houses on stilts everywhere because the water will fluctuate by 10, 15 feet throughout the spring. So the scenery is somewhat similar where, shoreline scenery, it's a lot flatter land there. So there's a lot of agriculture, a lot of farming fields. And that's another reason why there's a lot of runoff and stuff that goes into the water there.
Is it grass or hard structure or both?
Yeah. So the river will be a lot of like a silty, mucky bottom. You won't get those shell deposits nearly as much. There's a lot of rock and stuff, but it's more of a softer bottom. But you do get a lot of sand flats, not the flats we're thinking of course. But when you get on them, you can see it's a hard packed compressed sand from the current. A lot of reed beds, a lot of reed points and stuff like that. I mean, guys such as yourself, you'd go down there and you'd go hit everything that would look bassy. You'd do well. Yeah, but it's still different. It is still different. Like guys are upwards of 150 fish a day, but like not stuff we're necessarily used to. Pulled down like 60 fish off one cast type of thing.
Wow.
Which I think it's that brown water that schools those fish a lot more than something we
sure.
Right?
Man, that's pretty cool. That's fascinating. So what would you consider your favorite way to target smallmouth if you could pick one technique or pattern? What's kind of your go-to or get you excited?
That's give you a pretty cheesy answer, but really it's so hard for me, man. Whichever way they're biting. I mean, I won a lot of money in the last few years fishing a football head in shell deposits. So again, knowing the river quite intimately and spending a lot of time behind the wheel, a lot of time looking at a camera, staring into my little screen as I'm drifting along the river. You kind of understand how the fish set up on the bottom of the river and what they're using. And like I said, the house I'm in right now was, the deposit down payment was paid for by a fishing tournament, dragging a football head in the shell bed. So if I had to answer with one, it would definitely be dragging a big 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce football head. Okay. I love it when I hear all the guys talking about finesse smallmouth, and we're over here with 7.6 medium heavies with big braid and big fluoro leaders, and we're cracking on these deep smallmouth like it's a flipping stick.
Yeah.
And they come in the boat. They get in the boat pretty quick. So I'd have to say it would be a football head, but a close second is definitely definitely a drop shot.
Okay, so when you're looking for these fish and targeting them with football heads, you mentioned deep water, you mentioned a little bit of camera and a lot of idling time looking at your electronics. What's important? I'm sure it's a combination of things, but as far as walk me through a typical, I guess, going over some structure and trying to see if there's some fish in that area, or if the structure is the right kind of structure you want to be looking for. What exactly are you doing, and how are you implementing that underwater camera during this as well?
So the first thing and the most important thing is there current? And I don't mean is there a little bit of current. Is there current hitting right onto what I'm looking for? If there's no current, I'm not even wasting my time, because with the current comes the zebra mussel shells. And then once the current hits a point, an edge, a hump, a rise, those shells will make somewhat, they call it actually, I don't want to get nerdy on you here, but they call it a hydraulic lift, actually. So what it does is the water will hit, and then it'll kind of make its own eddy on itself on these underwater obstacles. And and then what they do is they'll deposit the shells. So number one thing I'm looking for is current. The second thing I'm looking for is hard bottom. So because sometimes when you have current, doesn't necessarily mean hard bottom. I mean, it does for the most part, but it's got to be hard bottom. So obviously on the when I'm scanning on the side view or the down view, I'm really looking for it to light up like a Christmas tree. Like that screen has to get real bright, and that's telling me it's a hard bottom, and that'll be the first place that I check. Probably the most important aspect to all of finding these fish is the underwater camera. Now, I'm not sponsored by AquaView. I'd love to have a nice sponsorship by these guys with the amount of cameras I've smashed into the bottom of the river,
right?
And how many I've gone through in the last few years. But
sure,
in the clear water situations, there's nothing better than an AquaView. I mean, I have the Garmin Live Scope. I know guys will be using Active Targets and the new Humminbird Lives and stuff, but they just don't do the same thing when it comes to looking for fish on the river. You probably know it yourself if you're looking at that live technology. It works sometimes, but you can't rely on it. You can when you're in a lake setting and stuff, but obviously not in the river. So
before we get there, I just want a couple questions on that. So when you're idling and you find one of these spots and you see some current breaking over a piece of structure out there, and it looks like there's some hard bottom behind it, do you also have like 2D? Are you able to see them on your side image in the river? Are you doing any of that, or are you pretty much, you find a spot that looks good and you're looking at it with the camera right away?
100% with the camera. The reason is in the river, there's so much debris coming through the system that when I look at my 2D, you'd think I was in the best fishing spot every single place in the entire river.
Okay.
So don't get me wrong. There's guys that are, I'm fishing 2D and I'm catching fish, and I'm not going to argue with them because they're catching fish. But like the amount of crap I've seen flow through that system, relying on 2D to me is virtually useless for the most part. So I'll drop a camera right away. The camera will hit the bottom, and I'll do it if it looks right and I didn't see any fish. I'll do a couple of passes. Now, this is where, and I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but this is where it's become very difficult. The more you know, the less you know, in a sense, because the more you know, the more you want to understand each structure I fish. So let's use an underwater point as a certain example. I'll fish the front of it, I'll fish both sides of it, and I'll fish along the edges of it. But if you want to do that methodically with a camera, it could take you 4 hours.
Right. So
you get these situations where you get off the water and you're like, damn, like I just spent 8 hours on one hump. And I'm not even exaggerating. I have spent 8 hours on one hump.
I believe it.
So it ends up biting you. And it almost goes back. When you know less, you know more. I'd drop the camera. I'd see 2 big fish. I'm like, oh, this spot's amazing. I'd get there in the tournament. I'd catch a fish. I'd be like, oh, man, this is so easy. But then once you understand, first of all, once you drop a camera, you understand how many fish truly live in the bottom of the river. We catch a lot of fish, and we're catching 0.1% of them. Like, I truly believe that. Like, you'll catch 5 on a spot or on a stretch, and there's 800, not 20,
Right. So a typical camera setup, the one I have is kind of like this. My screen's the size of a cell phone, right? And I have the plenty of cord line going down. Do you put some sort of weight on that camera to get it down quicker and keep it so you can see what's going on?
Absolutely. You need the biggest, heaviest. If your camera's not heavy, leave it at home. You need the heaviest. I have the old AquaView that's got like a fish, like a yellow perch, and it's got these big belly weights. The new ones, they sell up to like 1 pound weights on them. So you got to get to the bottom, or else if it's light, the camera's spinning on itself. You'll feel sick. You won't see anything. Nice heavy camera, and I literally just drag it 6 inches. I let it And I'll give you guys a trick. Anybody who knows cameraing, I'm sure you got a bunch of guys that are going to listen to this that do a whole bunch of cameraing, and you get in an area, what I do is I actually let the camera hit the bottom, because often what it'll do is it'll turn on itself.
Sure.
And you should see how many times that the camera turns, and all of a sudden the smallmouth are like,
what's that? Yeah.
No, they'll actually they're following, and then the camera turns, and then they're like, oh, damn, he sees me. They'll all scatter.
Sure.
And you'd be like, I've been going down this stretch, and there's 8 giant smallmouth that are following this camera, and I never saw them for 1 second. So, yeah, it's so important to have.
Are you on the trolling mode, or are you in the driver's seat normally?
So I'm gonna pump my own tires a little bit. I'm what you want to call a pioneer when it comes to this whole camera electric motor. So 5 years ago, every single guy had a Fortrex, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had a Tarova, and everybody looked at me. Why would you put a Tarova on your boat? And I was like, oh, it's just the motor I have. I used to kind of play it dumb, trying to keep all the secrets. But what I was doing.
You're listening to the Smallmouth Crush podcast. Don't rush out to the water just yet. We'll be right back after this break.
Hey guys, are you interested in saving some money on your fishing tackle or fishing gear purchases? Want to get sponsorship pricing without having to wear that patch or getting your boat wrapped for a 20% discount? For me as a guide and a tournament angler, I spend a lot of money on equipment and gear, so every little bit helps. I joined the Insiders Club at a site called outdoorsponsors.com, and I encourage every one of you to do so as well. It's a yearly membership, and when you sign up, you'll get 20 to 40% off any of the brands that they've partnered with. It's super easy to sign up. I'm going to give you a code that's actually going to give you 50% off your first year subscription, so it's really a no-brainer. They have top brands like Bass Mafia, Rapala, Teenage Marine, Aquaview. List goes on and on. Over 80 brands so far and growing. Head on over to outdoorsponsors.com and use my code CRUSH50, all caps, CRUSH50, to save 50% off your first year's membership. Pretty cool deal. Let's get back to the podcast.
We're back to the Smallmouth Crush podcast with your host, Travis Manson.
I was using my Tarova. So when nobody had spot lock, I had spot lock for 3 years.
Yeah.
Like literally.
Yeah.
And that again is responsible for a whole bunch of dollars that were won during fishing tournaments. But so what I would do is I'm cameraing and I'm using the remote on the electric motor to reposition myself, pull off, pull in, whatever. So yes, I'm on the electric motor, but not in the same way you'd think. I'm sitting at the driver's seat with my remote control in my hand.
Yeah.
So this is how awesome it was back when it was a lot easier. I'd see a whole school of fish. I'd hit spot lock. I'd pull my camera up. I'd pick up my rod. I'd do one pitch. I'd catch a 5-pounder. That's kind of how, it was that easy the first 2 years. And obviously, it's amazing how fishing pressure can change things like.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, this is good stuff. So how do you, as far as someone that's just learning a camera system and working, so, obviously getting enough weight, and there's some creative ways to do that. I use tie straps on mine, and then I just put one of them big downrigger weights on. How about determining the size of fish that you're seeing on a camera? How do you teach somebody that?
That's another great question, man. Here's the rule I go by. If they have a bump on their forehead, they're huge.
They're big. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
If they're beat up, they're big. Like if their tails are, the second you see the split tails, they're old fish, they're big.
Yep.
And when they swim, if they have a real slow shimmy, they're big. In French, we call them the petits nerveux, which are the little nervous. So when they swim really fast, or they come up to the cat and they have these little black faces and they swim up, those are usually your 3-pounders.
Okay.
For the most part. So I'm wrong. I'm not always right, because sometimes you see a big pale one and they look small because they're not black, but they're really, really, really big, and you just can't get that same sizing. But go by if they're banged up, or if they have the double chin. When they have that double chin in the front where they have the mouth and then the second lump underneath. But it's only trial and error. Don't think if you see a whole bunch of black ones swimming around that you're on a school of giant fish. they're generally speaking, they're 3-pounders.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good stuff. That got me excited. Listen, I think Aquaview's an idiot for not contacting you, man. You need to be their spokesperson. What's the scariest thing you've seen down there on the camera? You got any stories?
That's a good question. I keep telling my buddy I'm going to see a body in like
right
boots at some point, but it hasn't happened. The scariest thing I've probably seen down there would be a giant muskie.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing how big they are, thinking the thing's actually going to attack my camera. I've actually had one of them come in hot on the camera to turn away at the last second, which is pretty neat. Awesome. But no, never saw anything too. Seen some really cool stuff down there. I
bet.
Yeah, sure. I've seen a bunch of random shipwrecks. I did see a car once. I found a car in like 25 foot of water, which I still don't understand. Like it was in the current, so I don't know if it fell off a barge or something, or who knows.
Was there any fish around it?
Yeah, there actually was. There's a bunch of, actually on the Quebec side of the St. Francis, there's a bunch of sunken planes that they sunk as dive sites and stuff like that. So there's some pretty cool stuff. I actually saw a diver once, which wasn't so cool. Didn't realize I was cameraing that close to a diver. So that was a bit weird. But yeah, no, nothing.
I can see that kind of being like, you know how when you're on live scope, you kind of lose sense of where you're at. I'm sure that's the same way when you're staring at a camera down there.
I've almost banged into a couple of navigational buoys before.
Sure,
I'd be alive. It'd be a lie if I told you I didn't. So
I bet. So your typical setup with a football jig, you're talking beefier rods, medium heavies, braid. What is your go-to line diameter when it comes to dragging? I assume you're dragging a football, or are you making casts? Okay.
Yeah, another good question. So when you go back to our, I was talking about spot lock before. We actually developed a way, and it's that technique. I'm not shy to say it, I should say. It's actually really slowed down, and it's in the last year or so, it's caused me a couple of good tournament finishes because I couldn't get the fish to bite the way I wanted to. A little bit stubborn when it comes to that. So there's two ways with those football heads. We would either do a spot lock on a specific area and bomb out a cast and then kind of drag and reel. We've had all sorts of whacked out hook sets under the boat, the fish jumping by because they're kind of biting on that current angle. But for the most part, you're right. It is drifting down the river with a football head. So normally what we were up until this year, it was pretty much a 7-foot medium heavy rod, 15-pound braid, and a 15-pound fluorocarbon leader. That is it. That is all. So that technique has also cost me many of thousands of dollars on broken off fish.
Yes. On
hook sets. Like we've had quite a few tournaments in the last 3 years that we showed up. We did really well. We finished second or third. But we're not the type of guys to come, those guys that come to the show. Oh man, I lost 3 6-pounders today. But I look at my partner and be like, dude, we left 15 grand in the lake. Not because they jumped off, just on dragging through those razor blade shell beds and then setting the hook. And the second you set the hook, it goes snap instantly. But some days, you break off 20 bites. So when you lose by 0.30 and you broke off 20 bites and you were fishing around 5-pounders, so it's cost us a lot. But generally speaking, it's a 15-pound braid with a 15-pound fluorocarbon leader and a stout spinning rod for the most part.
Spinning rod. Interesting. Spinning rod. Yeah. I love it.
I like that crossbody hook set. My right to
left.
I kind of drag it off the right side of the boat. And when it bites, I come across my body, and when the line doesn't break, they're pinned.
So I want to give you a real quick story because this kind of developed into this is some good information here. This was my first year on the river, really, really focusing on a football head and dragging it quite a bit. And I was still I learned a lot over the last couple months. It did actually cost me a very good finish, just like you were talking about in that last Bass Open there, especially on day one. But I originally was experimenting dragging a 1/2 ounce on a spinning rod, but the setup was my standard 8-pound braid, right? Because I was in finesse mode with a 10-pound. I bumped it up, 10 or 12-pound fluorocarbon leader. And instantly I knew, just like you're talking about, you're dragging on the bottom, stuff's happening. The line was too many nicks, but I also started losing a few fish after having them on for a while. They would jump twice, 3 times, If I got past that, I normally could get them in. But it was that first initial or jump or two. And so I switched to a bait caster. I stepped it up a little bit, went medium heavy. I did go heavier braid, a little bit heavier than what you're talking, though, actually. And I think it's too much. With 17 pounds. I went with 50. Now I'm actually heading back up there this week, and I have my football heads ready. And I went down to 20 because I just felt, and now I'm kind of thinking maybe go a little less from that. But you're right, it's a challenge. And what really got me hooked was the bite, dragging a football, like how much fun that is. And I really preferred dragging that on a spinning rod because that's just what I love to do. I don't have a problem doing it on a bait caster, but I kept thinking in my head, man, I wish I could make it work. So maybe if I step it up a little bit in the line, like you're saying, and go a little heavier on the fluorocarbon leader, I really like the way that feels in my hands when I'm dragging a football with a spinning rod. I think I'm with you with that.
Further. So for years, I lost a lot of fish. I was fishing a 1/2 ounce exposed hook. So you'd be like, man, how am I losing these fish? The thing is that the way they're biting it in the shell beds on the bottom, you never know how, like if you ever see those underwater footage of how smallmouth eat a craw, sometimes they thump it.
Yes.
Well, we're setting the hook often when
on that
fish is
thump.
They're biting it and spitting it out because that's what they do with craws.
Yep.
So, and this is actually, as cheesy as it is, it's a plug from one of my companies, but it changed. I was actually using this before I actually came on board with American Baitworks. So Freedom Tackle makes a swing head football head.
Yep.
Changes everything. The smallmouth will actually sew their mouths closed. The hook will go in and then re-pick through the other side of their mouth. And because what ends up happening is when they bite it, they don't have any leverage to throw it because the weight is moving with the line and the hook is staying in the same place. The moment I went to that, because that football head comes with a straight shank hook. So and I'm telling you about 3 years ago when I made the switch to that football head with the swing hook, I'm telling you I lost a fraction. Don't get me wrong, I still lose some. It's not an easy technique. It's not the bait caster that's going to get it in the boat anymore. You know, obviously, if you're using light spinning gear, that's not going to work.
Right.
But the difference between a 7-foot medium heavy spinning rod and a bait cast with 30-pound braid with a 20-pound leader, the difference will be negligible on the fish coming in the boat. The moment you put the right jig head, your catch rate will go up considerably. And I'm telling you, like pick those up and try them. You will be very, very satisfied.
I will. So when you're dragging that, and how does the hook set work? Can you walk me through that? Because I'm just picturing you're holding the rod at what, 90 degrees?
I usually hold it down towards, like it'll be about, if you were to calculate, about 3 feet off the water level would be the rod.
Yep.
And then what ends up happening is it's often like, you almost have to make the sound effect to understand what it is. It's just like, it goes tonk, like it just thumps the rod, and usually get a big slack line. So first thing is when your line goes slack on the hit, generally it's a real big one. I'm not really sure why, but just the numbers of big ones that have come from that type of hit. But it'll often just knock slack directly into your line. And literally you're setting, and that's why you break off so often, because you're going from a slack line, and then I come across my body on the hook set from right to left. And once that line tightens, then you're obviously setting your hook. So very rarely is it fish on, and a drop shot, you'll just have the fish on all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
You'll always have time to set the hook on a football head bite. Almost.
Okay.
It'll very rarely, and honestly, every once in a while, it'll come where the fish will be hooked up so fast that you're almost sure bringing them, you're going to lose them because you never got the hook in them. You need that sweeping hook set. It's not an up hook set like a drop shot. It's really a cross body,
okay,
spinning, flipping stick style.
And then once you feel that fish, I'm assuming you're reeling as hard as you can to keep.
No drag. My drag is cranked all the way down.
Yep.
It's burned me on thousands of smallmouth caught. I've maybe been burned 3 or 4 times with a real big one that comes up, and you're like, oh my god, and then it bulldogs and it breaks the line. But
Are
generally,
you adjusting your drag then as it gets closer to the boat if you need to? No.
Right in.
Okay.
Right in. Like,
Keep it coming. Keep it coming.
When that fish comes from 25 to 45 foot of water and you have her up, a lot of times at that part of the fight, they're kind of done. I don't want to mean the fight is done, but they're not going to go. It's not a smallmouth on a drop shot that's going to go take off and go down 20 feet. She might pull a bit, but just the tension of the rod will usually turn their head.
Turn it around. Good stuff. Wow. Whew.
Yeah.
That got me excited, man.
I talk a lot and I like sharing, so it works out.
No, that's great. Well, let's share a little more if you could.
Sure.
If you had to choose a couple colors, what are you looking at?
Whichever shade of green pumpkin you like.
Okay.
I'm a real natural color guy. I really don't. I try to keep fishing as easy as possible because this, even with all the years of experience, and this obviously I'm saying this jokingly, but I still find that I really suck. And the reason why I say that is the more you know, the less you know. Like, I feel like me and my buddy used to sit in his hot tub and we used to, airplay like Navionics from his tablet too, and we just talk fishing and just chill. And we'd realize like we'd open one door and then it'd be a room with 20 more doors in it. And you're like, oh man, you just opened the deep fishing door, but now do you fish, do you fish in the current? Do you fish out of current? Do you fish behind islands, in front? I mean, there's a million ways to it. So it's the same thing when it comes to color selection. I go largemouth fishing, I take black or green pumpkin. I go smallmouth fishing, I take green pumpkin. Or I take like a smelt or an alewife color if I'm fishing in a lake. Like
keeping it simple. Yeah.
3-4 colors. And like I've experimented with some different colors and stuff like that. And, I've for the most part, it's a green pumpkin, black flake, pretty natural. Don't get me wrong. Other colors work.
Yeah.
People have outcaught me with different colors, but it's a standard color.
What speed is that critical when you're drifting? Are you on the trolling motor a little bit to slow your drift, or are you just letting the river take it naturally, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. I'll slow my boat down if it's like a real strong west wind and we're ripping down the current, just because I can't feel my bait. But down there, I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't necessarily think it's nearly moving as fast as it is down there as it is on the surface with the wind. So I really try to. I definitely don't adjust the bait of my or the speed of my bait, I should say.
Okay.
I'll just kind of slow my boat down to have a better feel. But for the most part, I mean, I just along the bottom of the river.
Are you doing real controlled drifts where it's almost the point where, man, you get 3 minutes into a drift and you're back up top again? Or is there some scenarios where it's a longer drift? Or what's the percentage between those two?
99-1. Short drift versus long drift.
So you're just on a specific little deal.
I seem aggravated because you know how time consuming and monotonous and okay, bring up the lines. Let's go back up. Okay, bring up the lines. We're going put the electric motor back in. Put the electric motor back on the line. The rod's caught in the electric motor. I mean, I'm not the only one dealing with this crap. I deal with it every day where sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? Your lines stuck in your electric motor handle and all that crap.
Yeah.
But no, for the most part, they're ultra. I really wish I had drifts where there was a whole bunch of fish over a long stretch. Yeah. But it just doesn't work out that way. I mean, I think you can get a lot of smaller fish doing that, but I think the big fish are really specific.
Real defined spots. You mentioned 1/2 ounce and 3/4. When are you making the switch? Is it depth of water? Is it the feel of the bait? What's determining that? Whether it be a 1/2 or a 3/4? And are you ever going lighter or heavier?
Never lighter, never heavier. 1/2 for 90% of the situations, 3/4 for 10. The only time I really go to 3/4 is if too lazy to retie and my other rods are 3/4.
Sure.
Or really windy, really deep. I mean, because even in a strong west wind in 28 foot of water, I have no issue feeling a 1/2 ounce. Like, no issue.
So let's say you're on a good pattern. You have a bunch of spots. You locate them on the camera. You're feeling good. You decide to go at it with a football head and make these drifts and drags. Day of the tournament comes and you have a strong east wind backing up that current. Does that affect your game plan? or are you going to try to make it work? Or have you seen where an east wind or a different wind is really going to mess up some of these drifts? And what do you do to overcome that?
It's more difficult for the angler than the fish, I believe. The fish are in the current and they're down there. I don't want to get onto whether they're biting better or not, because it contradicts me every time anyways. Oh, east wind, it's going to suck. They're crushing it. Oh, it's a good west wind. They're not biting. So I have a real hard time. Anybody could tell you one thing and then you will have been able to prove the opposite the next time you go fishing. So, but it's more for the angler. It's easy to just drop a bait in front of the boat and let the boat drift backwards. So in those situations, I put the boat down current and I just drift down current and then drag behind the boat. And that makes a pretty badass hook set as well when you're coming from behind you forward on those drifts. But I just try to keep my life easy. If the current ain't right, or there's, for whatever reason, it's not bringing me down the river the way I needed to, I just put the nose with the current and drag myself down.
Okay. So you'll still try to make it work?
Always.
Man,
always.
That's a weakness of me. Especially in the upper part where I fish, when we get a strong east wind, I feel defeated almost when I'm launching the boat. But I need to get better at that.
Find those shell beds. Find the shell beds where the volume of smallmouth are. I'll tell you one thing. So I was practicing for the Renegade the last Renegade of the year, which was on out of the St. Lawrence, but obviously on the Ontario side, but like way further east, above the dam, but way further east. And in between Mallory Town and Rockport, which would be on the Canadian side, obviously. I mean, I found drifts that had hundreds, and I'm talking hundreds of smallmouth. Now, I don't know if guys are on them yet. I think a lot of it has to do with the river's just so big. There's so many current cuts, and this is the first time I ever really tried cameraing there. And like, I never want to ever hear somebody didn't bring in a 5-fish limit on the St. Lawrence ever again, just because if you actually start looking in that current, where there's actually some good current in the St. Lawrence, throughout the whole system, there is so many bass. Like, I'm talking drifts. Like, I told my partner, I'm like, I think I have a drift that has like 2,500 fish on it. I know that sounds completely nuts to say, because even when I say it, you sound like an idiot saying that. But like, everywhere the camera would spin, it would be 10s and 20s and 30s for 20 straight minutes. Wow. But at a certain point, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of them, right? So go, if you have a bad east wind, go fish deep current rock books.
Yeah. There he is. Yeah. Man, that's some good information right there, man. This was some good stuff. We are getting a little man, this hour flew by quick.
I know, quick. Man. That's why usually when we do these things, even when I bring people on, you can even do like a part 2 at some point.
I know, this is so crazy. Man, we didn't even get to half the stuff I wanted to ask you. Going back to this, I gotta ask. A lot of these fish, there's fish all over in the river. You get into some of this current and whatnot. You hear a lot of guys dragging drop shots. And obviously that does work. But what is going to be your reasoning that you go with a football head? Or maybe you do a lot with a drop shot. We didn't really get into that. But are some guys messing up by not dragging a football versus a drop shot?
Yes.
And why aren't they catching them? Why aren't they not catching those fish?
I think it has to do with a lot of lack of experience on how those fish are setting up in the river.
Okay.
Something I learned is they're not always eating. And that's one of the things I've had the most, like the hardest time understanding and figuring out and trying to totally, wrap my mind around, because I just think they straight up ain't eating sometimes. And, like I said, unfortunately for me, and I'm playing that poor me thing, but in the last year to 2 years, my football head bite has slowed down a lot. Now, is it because my fish are truly getting pressured after 7, 8, 10 years of hammering them? More guys doing it, more guys trying it. Is it a fishing pressure thing? Is it like Travis can go so far in? Is there less current in the system now in certain places? So that football head bite is not as good anymore versus a drop shot bite, because I watched a guy in a tournament this year feed it to me 10 feet from me with a drop shot. And like, I'm not saying he didn't know what he was doing, but I'm telling you, he didn't know what he was doing.
Sure.
And like I got.
And could it be that particular day? Maybe they just weren't on the football. You know what I mean?
That's the $1 million question, man.
Mhm.
Because, and then I started playing in my mind, going like, man, I gotta start throwing a drop shot on these spots. And guess what happened?
Sure.
I started throwing a drop shot. Guess what happened? Started catching some big fish. And now this year I still have like 100 packs of football heads because I ain't going through them as much anymore.
Yeah.
Because I've now switched over a little bit more to drop shot fishing. So,
right.
And I would almost go a step further. I was watching some of that Bass Live replays on the final day on the Open, and that Dean Meckes guy, who's a local up in your area,
Yep.
he was pushing a football head. I was
Sure.
like, I like this guy.
Right,
and,
right.
he weighed in what, like 224s, like back to back, right? So
yeah, I think he had a 27-pound day that one. So
yeah, it was a big bag and then another 24 or something like that. So I don't know yet, man. I don't know if.
And next year could be totally different. Could be back on the football.
Yeah. No, that's the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really have. I wish I can give you a definitive answer to that, but for the most part, I mean, I think more guys should throw the football head because everybody's throwing a drop shot. Football heads, it covers a lot of water. And one other thing, it draws fish in. That's something I didn't mention earlier. A football head will draw a fish in from a long distance on a shell bed. It's bang, 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 bang. It must be kicking up shells. A drop shot is a lot more finesse presentation. So when you see these guys fishing these specific drifts, a drop shot's great if you're right on their nose. But if you're fishing a giant shell flat, you're going to be way better off fishing a football head to bring the fish in from a further distance.
Right.
That's what I believe.
Dang. Okay.
Or not.
Blew my mind, guys. I know the viewers and watchers appreciated this podcast for sure. Some really good information. A couple things I need to ask. I ask every guest that comes on here. If I was to give you one bait to use for the whole year, what would that be?
Well, from what I've seen this year, the new flat-sided shad from Set the Hook infused with bait fuel. So bait fuel is basically a scientifically proven scent that was developed at Queen's University in Kingston. And we've now found a way. So that's been in the process for 4 years to get this to go. Like when I tell you this is not your traditional add some scent and it smells like garlic or it smells like anise or anything. What it's actually done is we've now, with all the Set the Hook and net bait products going forward, bait fuel is going to be infused and it's going to be cooked into the bait when they're being poured. So that being said, I saw some stuff this year with a flat-sided shad, which is basically a minnow bait. I wish I would have brought one here, but it's a minnow bait.
So I'm just taking notes. Flat-sided shad. And can people get their hands on this right now?
It's going to be available in about 3 weeks from now.
Okay.
So the reason why I say this is because I've been using it and testing it all year, and I've been watching smallmouth swallow drop shot baits to their crushers, which I have never ever seen before in all my years of drop shot fishing. They're hooked in the top of the mouth and the lip. I've actually had to, go in and from the gill plate and take out a drop shot bait, not a Senko, like a legit drop shot bait. And that showed me, and I mean, I've caught my 6 biggest fish this year came on that bait. So if I had to make a choice going forward, I mean, I've used it on suspended smallmouth on the Rideau Chain Lakes. I've used it on, St. Lawrence bottom dwelling fish.
What's the best way to rig that then? Is it on a drop shot?
Drop shot. Yeah, okay. Drop shot. I've been playing on a Ned head as well. Okay. Ned head's been doing some pretty bad things for it as well. But for the most part, standard drop shot, 3/8 ounce weight, 8-pound line. And it's been scary how many fish I've caught. My 6 biggest fish this year have actually come on that bait. So
okay.
If you had to ask me, what am I using right now?
Yeah. Good to know. So what is your personal best smallmouth?
So my personal best smallie, I actually have 2 of them in the same day at the B1 in 2014. Were 684, both of them.
Sure. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I had 2 684s and a 6.5 that day. So that was a day I'll remember for a long time.
Football head?
I have sorry, what'd you say?
Football head?
Both of them on football heads.
Nice.
Yeah. Football head with craw baits on the back of them. And I have a smallmouth from my younger days that I didn't have a scale in the boat. That must have been like a 30-inch smallmouth. I have no idea how big it was. Right. But one day I'll share you a pic of it. You make your guess on it. I'm assuming it's a 7.5 close to 8-pounder. It was a real big,
Wow.
deep tube fish on St. Francis. But my biggest fish ever weighed are 2 684s in the same day of the tournament.
Nice. Very nice.
It's kind of weird and funky at the same time.
Yes. Well, good stuff. We definitely ran out of time. I'd love to have you possibly on a future live show at some point here. So we'd love to have you back. Awesome. What's a way people can follow you, keep up with you on social media? What's the best way to get a hold of you if they want?
Yeah, so I've actually, in the last year and a half, I've created a Facebook page called Breaking Bass with Jay Gramada. So if you type in Breaking Bass with Jay Gramada, you got all sorts of content on there. I do a bunch of lives during tournaments, pre-tournaments, post-tournament, kind of real organic stuff. I really try to educate anglers. I share a lot of the company stuff that I do to support the companies that I work for. And then obviously you can just follow me on my regular Facebook page. It'll just be Jason Gramada Fishing. A bunch of my personal stuff, family stuff, stupid stuff I like to share. I mean, I'm pretty much an open book, as you've probably seen with this podcast here. But for the most part, everything's going to be kind of on Bacon Bass Jay. And I'm hoping next year, if my cards line up right, I'll be fishing the 3 Bassmaster Northern Opens.
Nice,
so
sure.
if that works out, I'm going to try to shoot like a video series. Nothing crazy like what Polinick's doing and anything, but just kind of like a real homegrown, down-to-earth, organic, from the moment I leave to the moment the event is done, with a bunch of on water and stuff. So it's a cool page. It's a lot more stuff coming to it, but that would probably be the best way to go ahead and follow me. Very good.
Awesome stuff, man. I really appreciate you hanging out with us for this podcast, and you're welcome back anytime.
My pleasure, man. We'll talk soon.
Cool. And if anyone needs to get a hold or check them out on social media, we'll put those descriptions down at the bottom. And as always, until next time, we'll see you guys on the water.
Thanks so much for listening today. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show and follow us on Instagram at SmallmouthCrush. Also, the YouTube channel, SmallmouthCrush. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and comment with a review below. And as always, until next time, we'll see you on the water.